Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Belle again, and welcome to The Roads with Belle. Today is June 22nd, 2025, and this is episode 96 of The Roads Not Taken, which is a weekly series where we go over the news that was unreported, underreported, didn't get the coverage we thought it deserved, or we just found it interesting. And then we go through some questions from y'all. Today is June 22nd and World Rainforest Day. And on this date in 1990, Checkpoint Charlie was removed. Even though the wall was torn down earlier, the checkpoint still served as an official crossing in Berlin. And starting with foreign policy, MAGA is split over potential U.S. involvement in the Iran-Israel conflict. Adding to the list of reasons Trump is concerned about getting involved is reportedly the worry of it turning into another Libya. Food rations for 300,000 people at one of Africa's largest refugee camps have been cut in half after U.S. aid was cut. The instability caused by the U.S. ending aid efforts around the world might end up with the U.S. losing access to critical markets and minerals. You know, since apparently America doesn't care about people starving. In the UK, a group called Palestinian Action broke into a Royal Air Force installation and vandalized 2 aircraft. The government is talking about introducing legislation to ban the organization now. The U.S. moved B-2s back to Guam. In U.S. news, the original judge in the Newsom versus Trump dispute over control of the National Guard in L.A. has given the parties until the 23rd to submit briefs as the case moves on. Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill is being changed so fast, it's hard to keep up. Some of the changes made in the Senate have exactly 0 chance of making it through the House, so expect even more changes. The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected fast-tracking a challenge to his tariffs brought by toy makers. As expected, the Senate parliamentarian is flagging major sections of the One Big Beautiful Bill and hasn't even gotten to the GOP's, let's just call it, creative accounting measures. In cultural news, in a completely unsurprising move, a court blocked Louisiana's attempt to force the 10 Commandments into the public classrooms. This is just one more step toward it going to the Supreme Court, which has historically held this type of thing as unconstitutional. Despite having to call back Voice of America's Persian service earlier this month, Trump is reportedly still trying to dismantle the organization. Trump has once again extended the deadline on the TikTok ban. In science news, a heat dome is going to cover much of the U.S. with particularly troubling temperatures in the Midwest and the Northeast. Stay hydrated and cool. The oceans are changing colors. They're getting greener at the poles and bluer near the equator. That signals a loss of phytoplankton near the equator, which might mean less fish. In economic news, Trump says maybe he'll fire Jerome Powell because the Federal Reserve didn't lower interest rates. With the higher inflation and unemployment, lowering interest rates right now would likely be a disaster for the U.S. economy. The U.S. and EU are nearing a deal on non-tariff trade issues. After Russian economists warned the country is on the verge of a recession, Putin said this was, quote, not to be allowed under any circumstances. Economists all over the world scratch their head, like, my dude, you can't threaten to push the economy out of a window. In Oddities, 2 Iranian F-14 Tomcats were seen in satellite photos after being destroyed by Israeli strikes. Yes, American-made F-14s. They were transferred to Iran back in the 1970s. Threats circulated online in North Carolina after the Senate added a provision that would ban shrimping in the state's sounds. And onto the Q&A. Well, I'm recording this last night, and it's at this point that I was interrupted. So this just in. The U.S. has reportedly struck at least one nuclear facility in Iran. There will be a full update today, and I guess there's no confusion over why the B-2s were moved. They're probably returning to the U.S. now. On to our first question. We got a number of questions similar to this. Can you really draw a line from the U.S.-UK engineered coup in Iran to today's events? So, in the 50s, the U.S. and the UK supported a coup in Iran. You can run a pretty direct line from the coup to the 1979 revolution, and you can run a direct line from the 1979 revolution to today's events. That's not a bad read of history generally. And I know one of the questions asked directly, is this reasonably accurate? If not, is it easily explained where I've gone wrong on this? It's reasonably accurate, but obviously there's a lot more nuance. As an example, and before I say this next part, obviously engineered coups are bad, especially the way the West was doing it around this point in history. But it probably wasn't the coup exactly. So after the coup and before the 79 revolution, the U.S. adopted something called the Nixon Doctrine, somewhere around 1969. The idea was that the regional powers should take on more share of the defense. Most people only know it as an attempt to turn the Vietnam War over to the South Vietnamese. The doctrine applied to all of Asia, and the Shah, who the U.S. was supporting in Iran, used this as a justification to buy a bunch of arms, which the U.S. sold him. He also militarized the police and became more authoritarian, all while there was a sharp economic contraction. This was really the turning point towards the 1979 revolution. But without the coup, none of the doctrine changes would have mattered to Iran. The more recent direct cause was Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. Is it possible you can do an episode that covers a list of talking points about the non-financial items in Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill? It would be especially helpful for those of us who'd like to try to convince friends, relatives, neighbors how bad the reconciliation bill really is. That is, the vast majority of discussions we've been hearing in the popular media about how horrible the BBB will be deal almost exclusively with its economic impact on working people, e.g., huge tax breaks, almost exclusively for the hyper-rich, truly massive cuts to Medicaid and food assistance, and eventually to SS and Medicare, etc. An episode on this is absolutely coming. Once the Senate parliamentarian finishes her work, we'll put it out. It's going to be a pretty big list, but it's worth kind of noting that the reason most commentators aren't focusing on it is because most of it should be ripped out pretty soon. Did the Army recently make Palantir executives lieutenant colonels? I've seen a lot about this, but it all seems too sensational. Okay, so there's an element of truth to this. Direct commissioning to higher rank is uncommon, but it happens. Normally, it's because of a certain profession. Like doctors or lawyers, they come in as captains or majors, a lot of times. Sometimes it's something super secret, but that isn't done as much anymore. And the third reason is PR. And that's exactly what this is. It's definitely not a secret. The Army put out a press release about it. 4 tech executives were made lieutenant colonels in the reserves to promote a new initiative to bring tech industry expertise into the Army. Only 1 in 4 works for that company. And this probably isn't something to worry about, but it signals closer relationships between the military and the tech world, which might give us something to worry about later. So that looks like it. A little more information, a little more context, and having the right information will make all the difference. Y'all have a good day.